They say that the people closest to you are the ones who can cut you the deepest, because they are the only ones who know exactly where your armor ends. Where are you watching from? This is a fictional story, but the scars it describes are very real. My name is Arthur. For 4 decades, I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building a commercial real estate empire from a single, rusted-out pickup truck. When I first started out, I was a 22-year-old kid with grease permanently stained under my fingernails, taking whatever small contracting jobs I could find to keep a roof over my head. I amassed a fortune that most people could not comprehend, yet I never lost my reverence for hard work. While my peers spent their weekends on yachts in the Mediterranean, or playing golf at exclusive country clubs, I preferred to put on my old canvas overalls and work as a handyman on my own properties. I loved the smell of sawdust, the weight of a hammer, and the honest exhaustion of physical labor. It kept my mind sharp and my ego in check. It was a constant reminder of where I came from, and how easily it could all be taken away if I ever forgot the value of a single dollar. But my wife, Eleanor, despised it. We had been married for 40 years, starting when we had nothing but a mattress on the floor and a jar of pennies we saved for groceries. We survived on cheap noodles and big dreams. Over time, however, as our bank accounts swelled and our social circle shifted, so did her sense of entitlement. She traded her warmth for designer gowns and high society galas. To her, my calloused hands were a source of profound embarrassment. She wanted a husband who looked like a billionaire, a man who belonged on the cover of financial magazines, not one who looked like a day laborer stopping by to fix a leaky pipe. Her resentment grew like a slow-moving cancer, eating away at the foundation of our marriage, until nothing was left but a hollow shell of pleasantries and passive-aggressive remarks. Our daughter, Sarah, was the light of my life. I raised her to be humble, to appreciate the simple things, but she fell under the spell of a man named Julian. Julian was Sarah's fiancé, a slick Ivy League-educated corporate lawyer who wore bespoke suits and spoke in calculated, velvet tones. From the very first moment he stepped into our mansion, carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car, I sensed a predator. He was too polished, too interested in the structural hierarchy of my trusts, and too dismissive of anyone he deemed beneath him, including me. He treated me with a thinly veiled condescension, viewing me as an uncultured relic sitting on a mountain of gold. He thought my preference for manual labor was a sign of low intelligence, a weakness he could exploit. 2 years ago, my world fractured completely. Sarah, who used to call me every single day just to check in, suddenly cut me out of her life. She arrived at my study one freezing evening, tears streaming down her face, and threw a thick stack of printed text messages onto my desk. They were explicit romantic exchanges between me and a woman named Brioni. The problem was, I had never met a woman named Brioni. I had never cheated on Eleanor. I had been faithful for 40 years, I tried to explain. But Eleanor burst into the room at that exact moment, sobbing hysterically, playing the role of the devastated, betrayed wife with Oscar-worthy precision. Sarah looked at me with pure disgust, told me she never wanted to see me again, and walked out into the winter night. For 2 years, I lived in agonizing isolation, carrying the weight of a sin I never committed, kept away from my beloved daughter and my little granddaughter, Lily. My heart was broken, and I retreated into my work, burying my sorrow under mountains of corporate contracts. Today was December 13th. It was Eleanor's 60th birthday and our 40th wedding anniversary. Despite the coldness between us, I am a man of tradition and loyalty. Every year, for 40 years, I bought her a $12 bouquet of yellow roses from a small, independent flower shop. It was the exact same bouquet I bought her when I proposed to her in a dingy diner all those years ago. I put on my old coat and drove my battered truck to the shop, owned by my oldest friend, Marcus. Marcus was a former private investigator who had retired to a quiet life of botany, but his eyes never lost their sharp, investigative edge. When I walked through the bell-chimed door of his shop, Marcus did not greet me with his usual warm smile. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He walked quickly around the counter, grabbed me by the shoulders with a surprising strength, and pushed me toward the back of the store. "Arthur, don't say a single word," Marcus whispered intensely, his grip like a vice. "Get into the back room, behind the floral refrigerators. There is a small secret room I use for rare orchid cultivation. Hide in there, and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." I was too stunned to argue. The urgency in my old friend's eyes told me that this was a matter of life and death. I slipped behind the massive stainless steel refrigerators, and stepped into the dim, humid confines of the secret room. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic flowers. Just as the heavy wooden door clicked shut, the bell at the front of the shop chimed again. Through a narrow ventilation grate near the ceiling, I had a clear view of the front counter. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird when I saw Eleanor walk in. And right beside her was Julian, Sarah's arrogant fiancé. They did not wait for Marcus to emerge from the back. Eleanor immediately walked over to a bucket of yellow roses sitting on the display table. She pulled one out, holding it between two perfectly manicured fingers as if it were coated in poison. She let out a dry, venomous laugh that made my blood run cold. It was a laugh I had never heard before, entirely devoid of empathy or humanity. "Look at this, Julian," Eleanor sneered, dropping the rose onto the floor and crushing it beneath her expensive heel. "Cheap yellow roses, every single year. Arthur thinks this pathetic tradition excuses his complete lack of sophistication. 40 years of this stingy, embarrassing nonsense. I cannot wait to be rid of it. I have spent decades playing the role of the dutiful, patient wife to a man who would rather smell like a construction site than a boardroom." Julian chuckled, a low, cruel sound that vibrated through the small shop. He leaned against the counter, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored shirt, a look of smug satisfaction plastered across his face. "Patience, Eleanor. You only have to endure the old handyman for a few more hours. Tonight, after the birthday guests arrive, we drop the hammer. The transfer documents are flawless. He'll sign them because he thinks he has no other choice." "Are you absolutely certain?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "Arthur is stubborn. If he senses a trap, he will fight back, and he has a very capable legal team." "He won't sense a thing," Julian interrupted confidently, waving his hand dismissively. "The fake financial audits are perfect. Sterling made sure of it. Our esteemed attorney has crafted a masterpiece of financial fiction. When we present the evidence that Arthur supposedly embezzled millions of dollars from his own shareholders to fund non-existent overseas accounts, he'll face a simple choice: sign over complete control of the estate and the trust to us, or face federal indictment and spend his final years in a concrete cell. He'll sign. He's weak, isolated, and broken. We made sure of that when we drove Sarah away." Inside the dark, damp secret room, the air vanished from my lungs. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the wooden edge of a planting table to keep from collapsing. "I still can't believe how easily Sarah fell for those fake messages," Eleanor said, a twisted, proud smile playing on her lips. "I bought a burner phone, invented Brioni, and texted myself for 3 weeks. I even created fake hotel receipts." Sarah ate it right up. "She truly believes her father is a disgusting, cheating monster. It was the easiest way to remove his only ally, and now she won't even take his calls. It was a brilliant strategy." Julian praised her, though his eyes darted nervously toward the window, as if expecting someone to arrive. "But we need this finalized tonight, Eleanor. No delays. The trust must be under my administrative control by midnight." "Not tomorrow morning, midnight. Why the rush, Julian?" Eleanor asked, narrowing her eyes, finally catching the subtle note of desperation in his voice. "The wedding isn't for another month. What difference does a few hours make?" Julian hesitated, his confident facade cracking for a fraction of a second. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Business opportunities, Eleanor. The market waits for no one. Once I have the assets, we launch the new conglomerate, and you take your rightful place as the sole matriarch of a billion-dollar empire. Arthur gets to live out his days in a modest apartment, far away from us, where his precious hard work won't embarrass us anymore." They turned and walked out of the shop, the bell chiming merrily behind them, completely oblivious to the destruction they had just unleashed. They had just committed a fatal mistake. They had spoken their treason aloud, believing they were in an empty room, safe from prying ears. They had no idea that the man they were planning to destroy, the man they considered a foolish old handyman, had just overheard every single horrifying word of their conspiracy. I stood in the shadows, my fists clenched so tightly my fingernails bit into my palms, drawing tiny drops of blood. The betrayal was an absolute, suffocating agony. My wife of 40 years had engineered a psychological operation to turn my own daughter against me, just to isolate me for a hostile takeover. She was perfectly willing to destroy Sarah's family dynamic, to deprive Lily of her grandfather, just to satisfy her own limitless greed. The pain was unbearable, but it was quickly being swallowed by something else. A cold, calculating rage. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stumbled out of the secret room. Marcus was already standing there, holding a cup of black coffee. He handed it to me in silence. His face was grim, etched with the solemnity of a man who had just confirmed a terrible tragedy. He knew what I was feeling because he had seen it coming. "I've been investigating Julian for the past 6 months, Arthur," Marcus said quietly, leading me to a small wooden table in his back office. He pulled a thick blue leather notebook from a locked desk drawer and slid it across the table. "I didn't want to bring this to you until I had absolute proof. I knew it would break your heart, and I didn't want to accuse your family without irrefutable evidence." I opened the notebook. It was a masterpiece of private investigation, a testament to Marcus's old detective skills. There were high-resolution photographs of Eleanor and Julian meeting in secluded high-end restaurants, their heads close together as they studied legal documents. There were photocopies of forged property deeds, bearing signatures that looked perfectly like mine, but were expertly fabricated by a master forger. But the most damning evidence was hidden in the financial tracking pages near the back of the book. "Julian isn't the brilliant legal prodigy he pretends to be," Marcus explained, his voice low and steady, tapping a page filled with highlighted bank statements and wire transfers. "He is a degenerate gambler. He lost heavily on offshore sports betting syndicates. He currently owes $3 million to a very violent, very impatient loan shark operation out of Chicago. They don't care about his Harvard degree or his bespoke suits. They only care about their money." The pieces slammed together with terrifying crystalline clarity in my mind. "The midnight deadline," I whispered, remembering the panic in Julian's voice. "Exactly," Marcus nodded slowly. "Julian is a dead man walking. The mob has given him until midnight tonight to clear his debt, or they are going to start breaking his bones. He desperately needs to collateralize your real estate holdings to secure a fast, illicit loan to pay them off. He is using Eleanor's greed to save his own life. And the legal mastermind behind this forgery is Attorney Sterling, the man you pay a premium to protect your corporate interests. Sterling is taking a massive cut of the payout. My own attorney, my wife, my future son-in-law. They had all banded together to butcher me. They viewed me as an obstacle, a bank vault standing in the way of their desires. If Julian is dealing with the mob," I said, my voice eerily calm, the initial shock wearing off to reveal the hardened businessman underneath, then tonight could become violent. If he gets desperate, he might try to force my hand physically. "We need a contingency," I agree, Marcus said, pulling out 2 small, encrypted radios. "We establish a secret distress code. If Julian tries to use physical force to make you sign, or if his creditors show up early and things get out of hand, you say the phrase, 'The yellow roses are wilting.' The moment I hear that over this radio, I trigger the silent alarm and send a private, armed security team through the doors. They will be waiting 2 blocks away, no police," I said firmly, staring at the photograph of Eleanor laughing with the man who was plotting to steal my life and destroy my daughter's happiness. "Not yet. I want to look them in the eyes when their world ends. I want them to feel the exact moment their arrogance turns to ash in their mouths. They think they are playing a game. I am going to show them the consequences." I left the flower shop with the blue notebook and the $12 bouquet of yellow roses resting on the passenger seat of my truck. The profound sadness that had paralyzed me for 2 years was completely gone, burned away by a cold, calculating fury. I drove to my private downtown office, bypassing my treacherous legal team entirely, and locked myself inside my secure, soundproof study. I opened a heavy steel safe hidden behind a massive oak bookshelf. Inside was a single pristine manila folder. 6 months ago, my decades of sharpened business instincts had warned me that something was deeply wrong in my household. I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know about the mob or the fake mistress, but I knew the scent of betrayal, the whispers, the sudden changes in Eleanor's spending habits, Julian's overly inquisitive nature regarding my estate planning. It all painted a picture of impending doom. So, acting entirely in secret with an outside counsel from a rival firm in another state, I had established an irrevocable charitable trust and a generational wealth fund designated solely for Sarah and my granddaughter, Lily. I had quietly transferred every single corporate share, every commercial property, and every liquid asset into those trusts. I paid the massive tax penalties up front to ensure the transfer was ironclad and immediate. Legally speaking, I was a pauper. The empire I built no longer belonged to me. I was merely its temporary, powerless administrator. Julian and Eleanor were scheming to steal an empty vault. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously preparing my counterstrike. I checked the batteries on a small, high-fidelity digital audio recorder. I placed the documents from Marcus's notebook into a leather briefcase. The trap was set, the bait was in place, it was time to let the rats walk into the cage. The mansion was ablaze with light when I arrived at 8 o'clock in the evening. Luxury cars, Bentleys, Mercedes, and Porsches lined the long, sweeping driveway. Attorney Sterling stepped up, opening his briefcase and placing a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table in the center of the room. Next to it, he placed a heavy sealed manila envelope. Eleanor placed a cold, trembling hand on my shoulder. "It's time, Arthur. Sign the transfer of authority. Let Julian take the burden off your shoulders. It is the absolute best thing for the family. You need to rest." I slowly looked up, meeting Julian's eyes, and if I refused to sign, I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Julian's artificial smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of absolute, ruthless malice. He stepped closer, leaning in so only I could hear his venomous words. "If you refuse, old man," Sterling opens that envelope. "It contains undeniable proof that you have been funneling corporate funds into offshore accounts. It's a complete fabrication, of course, but it's flawless. The SEC will arrest you by morning. You will die in federal prison, stripped of your dignity and your legacy. Sign the damn papers now." He checked his watch again. It was 10:30. Panic was beginning to fray the edges of his control. The loan sharks were circling, and the clock was ticking down to his destruction. "You would send your own father-in-law to prison?" I asked, looking at Eleanor, giving her one final chance to step back from the edge. Eleanor leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper that cut straight to the bone. "You stopped being my husband the day you decided fixing toilets was more important than matching my ambition. Sign it, Arthur. You have no one left. Sarah hates you. You are completely alone. Just surrender and fade away quietly." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They thought they had backed me into a corner from which there was no escape. They thought they held all the cards in this high-stakes game. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the living room swung open with a resounding crash that rattled the chandeliers. Every head in the room turned in shock. Standing in the doorway, drenched from the evening rain, her hair plastered to her face, was Sarah, my beautiful daughter, and standing right behind her, acting as her silent, imposing guardian, was Marcus. Sarah's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She didn't look at Eleanor, she didn't look at Julian. She walked straight across the room, ignoring the shocked gasps and murmurs of the wealthy guests, and threw her arms around my neck, holding on to me as if she were drowning. Sarah sobbed against my shoulder, her grip desperate and tight, her tears soaking through the fabric of my suit. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she wept, her voice breaking in the silent room. "I'm so sorry I believed them. I should have known better. Marcus came to my house. He showed me the burner phone records. He showed me everything. How could they do this? How could she do this to us?" The room descended into a stunned, paralyzed silence. Eleanor's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent white. The elegant, untouchable matriarch suddenly looked like a terrified ghost, her eyes darting frantically around the room. "Sarah, sweetie, what on earth are you talking about?" Eleanor stammered, taking a trembling step forward, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. "He's manipulating you again. You know what he did. You saw the messages. Don't you dare speak to me." Sarah screamed, turning on her mother with a ferocity I had never seen before. The raw anger in her voice echoed off the marble walls. "You made up a fake mistress. You destroyed my relationship with my father so you could steal his money. You make me sick." Julian's polished exterior completely shattered. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. The deadline was closing in, the mob was waiting, and his flawless plan was disintegrating before his eyes in front of the city's most powerful people. "This is ridiculous. This is absolute madness," Julian shouted, trying to maintain authority, his voice cracking with desperation. "Sterling, open the envelope. Call the authorities. This old fool is a criminal. He's corrupted his daughter's mind." I gently pulled away from Sarah's embrace and stood tall. I didn't look like a tired handyman anymore. I didn't look like a broken old man. I looked like the man who had crushed ruthless corporate rivals for 40 years, the architect of a billion-dollar empire. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the digital recorder, held it up for the entire room to see, and pressed play. The audio from the flower shop blasted through the quiet room, crystal clear and absolutely damning. Cheap yellow roses every single year, 40 years of this stingy, embarrassing nonsense. I cannot wait to be rid of it, Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer horror, realizing that her darkest secrets were being broadcast to the very people she was trying to impress. The fake financial audits are perfect. Sterling made sure of it. He'll sign. He's weak, isolated and broken. We made sure of that when we drove Sarah away. I bought a burner phone, invented Brioni and texted myself for 3 weeks. It was the easiest way to remove his only ally. The recording stopped. The click of the button sounded like a gunshot. The 12 elite guests, the people Eleanor had invited to witness my humiliation, were left completely speechless. They stared at Eleanor and Julian with open, unvarnished disgust. The high society reputation Eleanor had sacrificed her family to build evaporated in 5 seconds of audio. They were completely discovered, their monstrous true nature laid bare. Before Julian could even attempt a pathetic defense, the piercing wail of sirens cut through the night air. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively through the mansion's massive front windows, casting eerie shadows across the terrified faces of the conspirators. The front doors burst open, and 6 federal agents swarmed into the grand foyer, weapons drawn. Julian Vance and Richard Sterling. The lead agent barked, flashing a gold badge. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and forging legal documents." Julian panicked. The desperation of a cornered animal overtook him. He knew that if he went to jail, the loan sharks would murder him the second he stepped inside a holding cell. He let out a feral, terrified yell and lunged toward me, his fists raised, intending to physically force me to sign the documents in a last, insane act of madness. He didn't make it 2 steps. Marcus stepped fluidly in front of me, planted his feet with the practiced grace of a seasoned fighter, and punched Julian squarely in the solar plexus. The sickening thud of bone against flesh echoed through the room. Julian collapsed instantly, gasping for air like a landed fish, clutching his stomach as he curled into a pathetic ball on the expensive Persian rug. Agents hauled him roughly to his feet, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Sterling didn't even try to fight. He simply dropped his briefcase, raised his hands, and surrendered, his prestigious career and his freedom effectively over in an instant. Julian, coughing and spitting blood onto the pristine floor, glared at me with wild, manic eyes. "You think you won, you old mechanic. I don't care about jail. The mob is going to take everything you own. They will bleed you dry. The documents are in my name. The house, the trusts, they belong to me." I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the thick stack of transfer documents he had meticulously forged, and casually tore them in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. Julian screamed as the paper tore, his voice cracking, believing his only leverage was being destroyed right in front of him. "You still don't understand, do you, Julian?" I said, my voice echoing with absolute freezing authority, ensuring every guest in the room heard the truth. "You thought you were stealing a kingdom. You didn't realize the vault was already empty." The room was dead silent, save for Julian's ragged, bloody breathing and the distant sound of the rain. 6 months ago, I explained slowly, ensuring every word drove like a nail into his coffin, my instincts told me that a snake had entered my house. So I established an irrevocable trust. I transferred every single asset, every piece of commercial property, and every dollar of liquid capital into a generational fund solely controlled by Sarah. I legally own nothing. I am a handyman, just like you always said. Even if I had signed your pathetic, forged documents tonight, you would have received absolutely nothing. The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and he would have fallen face first onto the floor if the federal agents weren't holding him up by his arms. His fatal mistake was assuming that an old man with dirty hands didn't know how to protect his gold. He had no money, he had no collateral, and the Chicago loan sharks were waiting for a $3 million payment that was never going to arrive. He was a dead man, and he knew it. The terror in his eyes was absolute. The agents dragged Julian and Sterling out of the mansion, their frantic protests fading into the rainy night. Julian was officially replaced in Sarah's life by the cold, unforgiving reality of a federal prison cell. Eleanor remained standing by the grand fireplace. She was trembling violently, looking around at the guests who were already beginning to quickly file out the door, eager to distance themselves from the toxic wreckage of her life. She was completely alone. Her grand plan had collapsed into dust. She took a hesitant step toward me, tears streaming down her face, the fake arrogance completely washed away by sheer terror. Arthur, please. I'm your wife 40 years. You can't just leave me with nothing. We can fix this." I was confused. I looked at the woman I had once loved more than life itself. I looked at the ruin she had willingly brought upon our family for the sake of money and status. I felt no anger anymore, only a profound, hollow emptiness. "You left me 2 years ago, Eleanor," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any emotion, containing only pity for the pathetic creature she had become. "When you broke our daughter's heart, just to hurt me. When you invented a mistress to isolate me, you made your choice and now you get to live with it." I turned my back on her, wrapping my arm tightly around Sarah's shoulders. Together, with Marcus walking beside us, we walked out of the mansion, leaving Eleanor alone in her grand, empty house, and stepped out into the cool, cleansing rain. The aftermath was swift, public, and merciless. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted extortion. Word reached us a few months later that he had to be placed in solitary confinement for his own protection. The loan sharks he had defrauded had a remarkably long reach, even behind bars, and he lived every day in terror of what would happen if he ever entered the general population. Attorney Sterling was disbarred immediately and received a similar sentence, his reputation in the legal community permanently destroyed, serving as a cautionary tale for any lawyer tempted by corporate greed. Eleanor's fate was a different kind of prison, with no assets in her name and no access to the trust, which was now fully controlled by Sarah. She was forced to move out of the massive Hamptons mansion. The bank foreclosed on it within weeks. She currently lives in a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, struggling to pay her utility bills. Her wealthy friends abandoned her instantly, treating her like a social disease, terrified that her scandal would somehow taint their own pristine reputations. She spends her days entirely alone, surrounded by cheap furniture, haunted by the memory of the empire she threw away, simply because she thought she was too good for a man with calloused hands. Sarah and I spent the next year rebuilding the precious time we had lost. We took little Lily on long camping trips into the mountains, teaching her how to fish, how to build a fire, and how to appreciate the quiet beauty of nature. I officially stepped down from the day-to-day operations of the holding company, handing the reins over to a board of directors that Sarah oversees with integrity and brilliance. I still live simply. I still drive my battered pickup truck, and I still spend my weekends fixing broken fences, repairing drywall, and working with my hands. Wealth is a dangerous illusion. It can buy you sprawling mansions. It can buy you fake friends who will smile while plotting your downfall, and it can even buy you a fleeting sense of invincibility. But it can never buy loyalty, and it can never buy the peace of mind that comes from living an honest life. When greed becomes the foundation of a family, it is only a matter of time before the entire structure collapses into dust. The people who truly love you will never ask you to change who you are to fit their narrative. They will stand beside you, in canvas overalls or in a bespoke tuxedo, and they will value the content of your character over the size of your bank account. Thank you for listening to my story. Never let anyone make you feel small for doing honest work, and never ignore the warning signs when the people closest to you start changing for the worse. Protect your heart, protect your family, and the truth will always bring you into the light.